And what is actually paleoenvironmental research, and what kind of what is the kind of the practice how we can study this past environment? So now I will give just some kind of brief introduction so that you have kind of overview then when we go deeper to each of the topics separately. So in general, as the word paleo kind of gives you the indication, it's about looking into the past. So basically through paleoenvironmental research, we are trying to look how the past environments have looked and how they have changed and what kind of relationship there have been between organisms. So for example, we might try to use pollen from the sedimentary records to see how the vegetation have changed through time, or we could use geochemical markers or records to see how, for example, the lake or the condition in the lake have changed through time, or we can use different kind of proxies to reconstruct how the climate has changed. And I put there some pictures just to show that then that we can use this kind of a modern environments to see or make interpretations how the past have been. For example, we can look at today's how the pollen, for example, pollen record is today in the northern areas or in tundra vegetation, or how the pollen record looks inside conifer forest or broadleaf forest. And then when we look at the records showing the past situation, for example, in pollen data, we can make these interpretations that maybe at certain time points, based on the pollen data, there has been coniferous forest or broadleaf forest and so on. So basically we will use in paleoenvironmental research, the current conditions and the present is key to interpreting the past. But then at the same time, from the past we can get, or the past situations, we can get some kind of insights or indications what might be happening in the future. So this is kind of a cycle that goes on. With the paleoenvironmental research, we mean long study periods, so that we can see the long-term changes at different environmental settings. And usually at this context, the long means thousands of years, hundreds of years. So the scale is quite long. And we use data from fossil records or other records preserved in sedimentary archives. So basically, we use geological record as a laboratory for reconstructing the past. So basically, what can we reconstruct? We can reconstruct different kind of environments and processes that are changing it. For example, how climate is changing environment, natural disturbances we can reconstruct and how those have changed. For example, different ecosystems or habitats or environments, what kind of the human impact has been. So we can look at the climate conditions, and we can do the reconstructions and look to different scales. We can look just one species, for example, spruce. For example, how spruce forests have changed, and when spruce, for example, have migrated to Finland, and what kind of climate conditions or other environmental conditions these plants and animals have. Or then look at communities, so just plant communities of forest and so on, and go to bigger scales. We can also look through landscape scale, or even go even bigger, like more regional, continental scale, or even global scale, to see how the environment have changed. And when one thing that it's important also during the course, when you will be looking at different data and maybe trying to make some interpretations or listening, we give you some examples. When you are interpreting or when you are looking to the past, it's always remember the simplicity in the interpretation. So if you have a hypothesis that makes fewest assumptions, that should be selected. For example, if we would have the assumption that there's, for example, certain, if we would be doing a climate reconstructions, we would know that there's a species that exist in certain time of climatic envelope. So then we would make the assumption based on that, what we know, and not include any kind of complicated processes, but just make the kind of, if we know that spruce is growing in certain type of climatic conditions, then from that we can make an interpretation that this is now probably, if there was spruce, then probably it's been this kind of climatic parameters. Or even if in the pollen record there would be spruce pollen, and most of the pollen would be spruce, so then the most simplest interpretation would be that, okay, this area has been spruce forest. So just remember that it's kind of a simplicity. Well, then why would we actually want to look into the past? Why it is important to know this kind of a long-term changes, and why we would like to find out this kind of phenomenon. So basically, when we are going enough back in time, we can see the changes in the terrestrial or aquatic or marine ecosystems and different disturbance regimes or changes in climate that can be considered to be natural. So changes that happened without any impact of human actions or from human activity. So then now that we see the environment or the climate changing quite a lot and very intensely due to human activity, we can see the changes in climate, we can see the changes in the land use that has affected different environments. So then we can go back in time and see how the situation was before the human. And this gives the kind of a baseline for estimating how this, how big the human impact is and how these environments have kind of reacted before, and also gives some insight how they might react now and what might be the future changes. For example, we can look to the past and see how much fires or how frequent fires have been or how much burning there has been in the past and how that is related to climate, and then look at the present changes and maybe try to make some kind of prediction of the future changes. Or we can just look how the climate has changed and how the vegetation or the forests have changed, and then make interpretation how the possible warming temperatures might affect the forest and so on. So basically, we get this kind of a natural range of variability. And here in the figure that I've made here, this is kind of a rough example. So for example, if we would take changes in climate, there's been many changes, but it's been also usually between this kind of a range limits, or this could be fires, or this could be just kind of the distribution of some species. But then at some point, if it happens that the kind of the variability goes out of the natural range, then we know that there's some effect of humans or something has happened that has made the for example, climate or for example, fires to behave differently than they've done for thousands or tens of thousands of years. I've taken here as example one study that is done from Northern Europe, basically covering Fennoscandia. And this figure here presents burning over the Holocene, so during the last 11,000 years. And it's a smoothed figure that includes tens of sites. I think if I remember correctly, over 60 sites that have been researched for charcoal in the sediments. So basically what kind of burning have been in this area and how the area has burned. And for here we can see some changes in the fire or the amount of burned biomass during these 11,000 years. And we can see that there's been some changes, but then there's clearly an increase in the burning towards the late Holocene. And this increase have often related to the human impact. Also the increase of population, starting of the farming, and more human impact on the landscape. So here we can see that maybe this is a bit out of the variability that happened during the Holocene, but this just as one example. Then some terminology related, because you might hear us during the course and during the different lectures, you might hear us talking about paleoecology, paleoclimatology, maybe paleolimnology, and so on. So just to give you some idea what these terms might mean or actually means. So basically, when we talk about paleoecology, it means that we are looking into the interactions between organisms or interactions between organisms and their environments. So basically, we could be looking at two different tree species, for example, how they change relating to each other, or we could looking at the tree species in different environments or in climatic conditions. So basically, how the ecological change in the environment or in the landscapes. Then there's paleoclimatology. So basically, this means studying the past climates that have existed during the different geological ages. And there's different proxies and different methods to study paleoclimate. And for this, then, for example, Jon is going to talk to you more about, and also I think Maria will talk this a little bit. And then there's a broad term of paleolimnology. So basically, this area of study studies sediments preserved in different kind of aquatic or systems, inland systems, rivers, and so on. But basically using different kind of proxies to see from the lake sediments, for example, how the conditions in the lake or how the lake has changed or how the conditions surrounding the lake have changed. So this is kind of the basic idea of paleolimnology. And then important term, sometimes you might hear referred to taphonomy. So taphonomy in different occasions might mean different things, but in the context of paleo research, it means that the processes that are affecting the origin or the dispersal or the deposition and preservation of fossil remains of plant and animals and other proxies to, for example, to the lake sediments. So if you would look at this picture, for example, we have the lake, and if you would be looking at for example, the pollen record from the lake, and we would be thinking about the taphonomy of the pollen preservation or the pollen. So then we would be looking what are the kind of the factors that would be affecting the taphonomy of the pollen. So basically from how long or how far the pollen that is deposited is transported to the lake. Is it just from the lake shore or is it coming from wider area? Also the deposition, is there some events that would increase the accumulation time or affect the preservation of the fossil in the sediments. So these kind of things then also affect the interpretation and also the study questions that we want to ask. So these are some terms that you might encounter during the course. Then brief overview to the steps in paleoecological research. So the idea why I will go through these steps, these are pretty much similar within all the topics that we are going to present you, and this kind of overall view how the paleoenvironmental research is done. And in this picture, this is from this summer's short field excursion that me and Jon and Professor Heikki Seppä did through Finland from Helsinki to Muhos. And we were collecting lake sediment samples, and this is one lake that we were sampling. So basically before we go on with the research, we usually have an idea. So what do we want to study? What are the research questions that we would like to answer with the research? And then when we've kind of decided that, we will go on with the research. And here is just some questions. There can be so many as you can come up with, but here is some related to the course topics. So for example, what was the past climate like? How has the vegetation changed over time? Drivers of changes in different ecosystems. Can we see any changes in the long-term disturbances? And so this will then define what we are actually looking for when we are going, for example, to do fieldwork. If we are trying to look the past climate or vegetation, we would often look pollen, or for the vegetation for past climate, we could use pollen or biomarkers or other proxies like chironomids and so on. If we want to look at the changes in the disturbance regime, we would, for example, look at fires and so on, and look for charcoal from the sediments. And then if we would look at the drivers of changes in different ecosystems, we would try to obtain pollen data to interpret, for example, vegetation, then get some indicators of proxies for past climate, for example, isotopes or some biomarkers and so on. And then for example, the disturbances, we could use the charcoal. And then we could also, or we should actually decide the scale of the research, what kind of temporal scale we are trying to look, if we are just trying to look the couple of thousand of years or a few thousands of years, or if we aim to go and get information for the whole Holocene, so over 10,000 of years, or even if we would like to go for a longer core and look beyond the last glacial period and so on. So this would then define what kind of site and what kind of core we would like to obtain. Also the resolution, if we would like to have resolution in the data for 10 of years or hundreds of years of resolution. So this will also define what kind of site we will look for. Then also the spatial scale, if we are trying to look global or continental or regional scale, or which then we would probably try to choose some kind of a core that collects information from wider area for a global change, for example, from marine cores or ice cores, or maybe use several cores from different continents, or then usually for regional kind of record, you can use lake sediments, and then you can go for this kind of a small forest hollows for local stand scale. So this deciding the research question is the most important step, because then that will define the whole research afterwards. So then the actual steps. So then when we decided what we want to do, and we've decided what kind of environment or site we would like to collect the data, then there will be the first step is finding the sites, and then the sediment collection. And there's different sites and different ways to collect the sediments. So basically from the lake, you can take this kind of a long core that would, if the aim is to study whole Holocene, and usually this could be done, for example, this kind of platform developed, or there's different ways, but then you can take core from the lake sediments through with these devices, or in Northern Europe and especially in Finland, it's easy to go during winter, because then you can just make the coring on ice or through ice. So then this is quite commonly done. Then also, if you want to look just the top sediments of the, for example, the lake or mire, then you could just take the few tens of centimeters on top. Usually the long cores, they are a few meters long, but then you can use just this kind of a gravity cores that then take only the maybe top 30 centimeters from the sediment, and gives information about maybe the last hundreds of maybe 1,000 years. So you can then go, usually you go during the summer and take it from the boat, but also this you can do through the ice during the winter. Then there is the peat cores that will be taken from mires or this kind of a small peat depressions that are inside of forest, and then you will end up with peat core. And usually these are done with different kind of cores. Here is Russian peat core that is used for taking sediment core. Then I've already mentioned a few times these different archives for the paleo research. So basically you can use lakes, and the size of the lake often determines the scale. So the bigger the lake, the bigger is the area that the information has usually accumulated, or the information that the lake gives. This is also same with mires, because when you have bigger mires also, then for example pollen can be transported to the mires and lakes with wind, or also charcoal can be transported with wind, and also then it will collect information from the atmosphere through rain and so on. So it gives usually quite regional signal. Then there's these ice cores and marine sediments that can give even more wider information, even more wider area than lakes. But then if you want to go to a more local scale, you can choose this kind of a small forest hollows that basically inside the forest there is these sites where there's peat developed, and then you can core these peat layers and then get information which is very local, because usually when the site is inside the forest there isn't that much proxies or fossils or, for example, pollen or charcoal transported with wind, but the most of the information that it's derived from these records comes quite near the site and within the forest. So this kind of a selection of the sites also affects the information that you will end up having. And what kind of then sediment cores will you get from these sites? So basically from lakes you usually get mud, so kitja, lake mud, and this is how it looks like. So basically if you would be coring from this kind of a platform built, for example, 2 rubber boats, you would get the sediment core inside this kind of a long tube, and then you can extract it from the tube, and then you will have this kind of a core that then can be subsampled and analyzed in the lab. Then, for example, this kind of a surface sediment core that you can take. Then that can be subsampled in the site, and then you can analyze that for the more later or like recent changes in the environment. Then these usually, if you take this kind of a lake, get your samples, and then you date it, and you get the time of the resolution, temporal resolution of this can be, depending of the accumulation rate, you can get tens of years or hundreds of years, depending how fast it accumulates. But it's very difficult to get very good time, the temporal resolution. But then, especially in Finland, there are these lakes that is called barred lakes. And if you get this kind of a barred lake sediment, then you will have annual resolution of the sediment, and then you could be analyzing these sites and have annual resolution and changes, for example, in the vegetation or in fires or geochemical signal and so on. Basically, how these are formed, they are during the last glacial period or directly after. So basically here, it's this kind of a changes in the sedimentation and the accumulation of the sediments. Usually during this kind of a spring flood time, there is this kind of a lighter layer when there is more sediment coming to the lake, and then there is this kind of dark layers that are usually summer winter layers that then are more organic when there is more peaceful sedimentation conditions in the lake. So then these can be used to get very good resolution of the site. Then there is peat cores from these mires or small forest hollows, and usually here also the resolution that you can get is only usually hundreds, can be tens of years, but depending of the kind of the peat accumulation and the site. And then ice cores that you can take, for example, glaciers. And this example is from West Antarctic, and it's covering tens of or hundreds of years, hundreds of thousands of years. And there's an example of information that can be obtained from these ice cores. So there's basically an example of ash layer from volcanic eruption, and it's been dated to 21,000 years ago. So this kind of different informations or time resolutions you can get from different types of material and cores that are obtained for the paleoenvironmental research. So then when we actually have the core, it will be measured and also described in the laboratory, then also subsampled. Depending the resolution we are aiming, you can subsample every half a centimeter or every centimeter, or even higher resolution. Or if you want just have a core resolution, then for example 10 centimeters. And then from these samples you can analyze different kind of proxies, which I will show shortly. But then these samples, depending what we are trying to look for, they go through chemical treatments, different kind of methods. And then when we have the samples, we will analyze them under the microscope or with other devices or ways. But this is, for example, charcoal here. This is example for charcoal particles from the sediments are studied. So basically under this stereo microscope, and then you can photograph them. And for example, now there is one charcoal particle that is seen on the screen, and then you can analyze these. And also you can, this is just one example, and there's always their own methods when there's different proxy in question. So what kind of proxies for reconstructing past environments? there certainly is not all that there is. I've taken here some that we will also cover during the course, and then few maybe the most used ones. I've tried to organize these based on what they can be used to reconstruct, but this is not the absolute truth. They can be used together to reconstruct different kind of environments or make summary of the environmental conditions. But usually, for example, climate is reconstructed from isotopes or biomarkers or pollen, or then there is this kind of a foramininferas or chironomids. So basically there's many ways to reconstruct climate, and they might give a bit different results, but then if you use different kind of reconstructions and you get similar results, then you can be quite sure that you are on the right track. Also, vegetation can be reconstructed from many different proxies. The most common being pollen and macrofossils, also non-pollen paleonomorphs that can give indicator of different species. Then disturbances can be reconstructed. For example, insect outbreaks from insect remains in the sediments, or forest fires from charcoals. Then also different non-pollen paleonomorphs, or some can be used to interpret fires or human disturbance in the area, or biomarkers can be used for different disturbances. Also, you can use tree rings for going back a few hundreds of years in times, and usually you can see, for example, fires in the tree rings. Then also you can use geochemical data that can give you indication of the climates or the disturbances or the vegetation. Same with the geophysical data. And then there's different kind of living organisms like diatoms and Trichopteras, Cladoceras that can be used to make different kind of environmental reconstructions. But as you see that the area of paleoenvironmental research is very wide, and you can use different kind of methods, different kind of proxies. And so there is a wide range of ways how to do the research. Then when you have done the fieldwork, you've done the analysis in the lab, and then there's what is left is then interpreting, analyzing the results. So with the paleo data, you can do many different types of reconstructions. You can, first of all, you need core chronology so that you can put your data at the right place in time. And the next lecture or the next topic that you will have, and the first actual topic in this course, is about core chronology and dating methods, because and Jon will give you this introduction to this topic, because this is very important to know in paleo environmental research. For example, if you would have a vegetation reconstructions, and if you wouldn't know when changes happened, then it wouldn't actually make any idea to have the reconstruction. So it is important to know how old the sedimentary record that you have actually is. So for that, there is this dating and chronology that you can do. And then there's also different ways to reconstruct vegetation or use model vegetation cover. Also temperature reconstructions. There's different ways to statistically analyze the data. So we will try to touch some of the issues and the ways how to interpret and how to use paleo data during this course. But there are so many ways that we are not able to deal with all of them, but at least you will get some kind of overview. Then just a few words about the time scale of the research. I've already referred to that a few times, but usually in paleo research, the time scale or the length of the time is usually limited by the length of the accessible cores and also the dating methods. How we can date the cores. Usually the most commonly looked time period that has been or is this last glacial and interglacial periods, but we can go also to previous interglacials, but usually, especially in Northern Europe, the cores cover the time period after last glaciation. But there's from, for example, from Lake Baikal and also from Greece, uh, in other areas. There's cores also from Spain. There's cores that cover time periods that last long over this interglacial and also to the last glacial and last interglacials. So it depends what kind of core we can get and what kind of information we can get. And if you want to go further back in time, then usually ice and marine cores can provide information from longer time period. And also the temporal resolution of the research is limited by the core chronology. Usually we can go as high as tens or hundreds of years, but exception with the Ward Lake sediments that can provide yearly reconstruction, like I already explained. Then just I put here some chronological terms that you might hear during the course. So basically, if we talk about quaternary period, it's about last 2.7 million years. Glacial period, so it's that time when there was colder temperatures and glacier advances. Interglacials, those are the periods of warmer climate between glacial periods. Then last glacial maximum usually refers to time circa 19,000 years ago. Late glacial, usually the transition between the last glacial stage, which was Weichselian, and then the Holocene, which is the current interglacial period, covering a little bit over 11,000 years. And then you can sometimes probably see this kind of a BP, which means before present, and typically the paleoenvironmental data is presented as before present, and usually the present, because usually the times are derived with radiocarbon dating, and this is usually calculated from the 1950. So typically the present is 1950, but sometimes the date can be converted so that the present is 2000 and so on, but this keeps changing as the years keeps changing. But then you can also see there this kind of a short cal word, and that means that then the given years will be calibrated years and not just basic radiocarbon years. And there's different ways of concerning different kind of proxies for dating, and I'm sure Jon will talk about these more, but these are just the most typical, because usually the research covers the Holocene period or the period that can be covered with radiocarbon dating. Then just at the end, I would like to say a few things about what are the implications of paleoenvironmental data. Maybe we've a little bit already I've talked about it, but basically when we then have the data and we can do this kind of a conclusions and reconstructions of the past and what processes have affected to the changes in the past environment. So maybe when we know what has happened, we can also kind of predict how the ecosystems will respond in the future. So for example, if we look how the temperatures have changed or how the climate has changed and how, for example, vegetation or other communities have, or for example, animal or plant communities has responded to these changes, then we might make predictions, for example, to the future, that how these similar changes in the climate might actually affect, for example, different vegetation communities or aquatic communities and so on. And also we can kind of use this data to make this kind of predictions, but then also know the reasons behind them. So then we could also try to make some kind of decisions how we should, for example, conserve some aquatic or terrestrial environments, how, for example, we would go on with the sustainable, for example, forest management, or if we would like to do some kind of conservation actions and how we would actually, or what we want to conserve, what is the actual baseline of the environment, and where we want to go back with the conservation issues and actions. So basically with the paleo research, we can get information and maybe understand more what is happening at the moment in the environment, and maybe also what may happen in the future. Then I hope now you have this some kind of overview what is meant by paleoenvironmental research, also what kind of proxies, how it's done, and now that then we go further in the course and the different topics, it will be hopefully a little bit easier to place those topics into context and also follow the